Welcome to 8 Cubes. I'm KMBest. He's Lambie Series. Together, we are the titular 8 Cubes. This is our show where we talk about the 8 most important topics in Marvel Snap. We're going to start with Arishem, and spoiler alert, that's going to be a bit of a running theme this episode. So let's start with the basics. Arishem the Judge is a 7 cost, 7 power card that gives you an extra energy on each of your turns. Your turn 1 has 2 energy, turn 2 has 3 energy. In addition, this card shuffles 12 random cards into your deck, which is the downside of this card. However, it has shown an incredible, immense play rate early in the metagame, with a 75% play rate in top 10% infinite over the first day of release, which is basically unprecedented and actually does speak to it is possible apparently that 75% of the player base can just get a new card. I had no idea. We talk about card acquisition a lot. Lambie, what's the basic reason why this card is as good and playable as it seems to be right now?
All right, so I actually have a lot to say about Arishem, and for the most part, I was the one that suggested that we have to do like many Arishem topics today because I have really a lot to say about this card. Okay, but so firstly, let's talk about play rate first. I think one of the biggest reasons, firstly, like not to go too deep into it, but why Arishem is played so much is really just because it's one of those cards that like it's just so much value when you buy it, right? It's like when you
Yeah.
buy a Thanos, when you buy a High Evo. Like at the baseline, if we disregard everything else, this card is just like next level in terms of newness. Like it's just such a new effect that like no one has ever experienced before. It's good for content, it's good for fun, and like I think that's one of the reasons why it's being played a lot at the base level. But why is it actually good? Like way better than I thought. So I don't like the idea of like 12 random cards in my deck. Of course, it's inconsistent. It's a bigger deck. It's not like consistent at all. But like the energy you get, I swear, is so important. Like there's a few specific things you can do in Arishem decks, like playing Coulson on turn 2 is like huge. Like playing turn 2 Coulson means you guarantee a 4 cost on turn 3, a 5 cost on turn 4. It's just crazy. Like the extra energy you getting to play 2 6 drops, right? A 6 on 5 and a 6 on 7 is like unprecedented. Like you don't even need to ramp into that. It's like just naturally inbuilt into the deck, you know. So I feel like Arishem, like without even talking too much about what he actually generates and whether those are good or bad, the fact that he has like energy cheat, is one of the biggest reasons why I feel like he's just super powerful right now. And there's a lot of cards in the game that are existing in the current game right now that actually benefit off from his energy cheat.
I think there's 2 things I wanted to highlight for this section that you haven't already. The first is Arishem has this right now there's like a bit of an aura of fear. And I like to compare this to Loki. A lot of people don't understand how to beat Loki once they get Loki. They don't understand, like, okay, I can actually think. What did they get? How many spaces are on their board? If they have a lane that has 3 things already filled in it, what is their max power in that lane? Can I beat that based on the cards they could get out of my deck, maybe plus a Mockingbird? If I can win that lane, can I win other lanes? Like there's a lot of thought that goes into beating a Loki after they Loki you and they have like a relatively full board, and basically no thought that goes into retreating. And I think one of the things that really stuck out to me playing Arishem was I was getting a lot of people who were retreating when I had nothing. It just presents some very scary possibilities, and then it says, okay, those possibilities are scary. I may or may not have them, but they're really scary if I do them. And so people are retreating as if they always have it. They're not calling enough. And I do think there is something to that. Now, the second thing I wanted to highlight is I missed on this interaction. I think a lot of people did. Blob Mystique seems absolutely disgusting. One of the biggest weaknesses that Arishem has is the existence of the card Darkhawk. And the fact that Mystique on a blob copies the whole blob effect. You actually get 2 blobs, or Artem Zola the blob, right? Your best draws with this deck against a normal deck are like turn 4 leech, turn 5 blob, turn 6 second blob, and a Mockingbird. Like that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, where you're just like leech on 5, blob on 6, Mystique Mockingbird on 6, I should say. Leech on your 5 energy turn, which is of course turn 4. Right? Like that is the extremely powerful thing that this deck is leveraging in normal matchups, and it happens to be extremely good into the best counter for the deck, which is Darkhawk. So I think all of that stuff is adding up to, I think this deck is easily targeted, but not necessarily easily destroyed.
Yeah, so this is quite interesting. Like whatever you say actually makes a lot of sense. Like what Arishem allows you to do with the whole like the blob and the mystique thing, right? Like, but my personal experience with this deck, like maybe because it's just the way I play or like the way I like look at RNG in general. Like I actually find a lot of value also from the random because we will talk about it a bit later. But I also actually find a lot of value from some of these random generated cards because, like you mentioned, people are like over retreating, right? Because they
Yes.
against your deck. But against when I play the deck, sometimes I also feel like people overstay because they don't actually know what you are snapping them with, right? I could literally be snapping you with the random card and not my blob that you know I have. If you are staying and maybe I'm snapping you with like maybe you think that okay, I'm snapping you because of blob, then the opponent is like, okay, I can beat blob, but maybe I'm just snapping you with a randomly generated, I don't know, tech card, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So that's a strength to Arishem as well because I can snap you with randomness and you have no idea. You might think it's snapping because of something in my deck, but I'm actually snapping you with something that I just randomly have out of nowhere, right? So that's a strength for Arishem as well.
So let's talk about what the default Arishem deck looks like right now. It's a little bit inbred. Maybe I would describe it as a lot inbred because there's a lot of Arishem running around right now. And I think this is something that we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but this is something that I really want to highlight. When you are seeing more than half of your games as one individual deck, if you are not building to beat that deck, you are throwing. Now, you don't have to be doing the exact things that I think are good to beat the Arishem mirror if you're going to play Arishem. Maybe you have a totally different strategy. That's fine. But you do not walk into a metagame where 50+% of people are playing the same deck and say, I'm going to play a version of this that is not prepared for the mirror. That because not only is that deck the deck with the biggest target on its back, so the rest of the metagame is going to be people that are good into what you're doing, you're also going to be bad into the mirror. So right now they are very mirror heavy. And we'll talk about this a little bit in the Darkhawk dance bit. But typically the things that are good in the mirror, Darkhawk is good in the mirror, Loki is good in the mirror, Blob and Mystique is good in the mirror, Blob and Zola is great in the mirror. Your tech cards like Shang-Chi, Rogue, not just for opposing Darkhawks, but if you rogue a blob, Rogue becomes the blob, so that's also pretty good. It doesn't get rid of the power the blob has, but it's pretty good. And so there's a lot of general power applications that this deck can create, and that kind of power is important to leverage. Now, the other issue that this deck does run into is that, like, okay, you're this like mirror tech Arishem decks against normal decks, you're just going to try to beat them. You run into some real issues when like you just like your opponent is playing like a Darkhawk. Like you just get snapped in like turn 3 or turn 4, and you have to look at them and be like, yeah, you just snap me because you drew Darkhawk, and that is almost always true. If anyone is snapping into you, it's because they drew the card Darkhawk. Like that is how this works. People are snapping into you when they get Darkhawk, maybe even earlier, or Loki, right? When I had Arishem matchups and I started the game with Loki in my hand, I was like turn 1 snapping them. I was like, look, you're just gonna die. I'm just gonna do this. Because Loki has the same dynamic into Arishem that it did into Thanos, where it's like, your deck is all good stuff. Thank you, I appreciate it. And so Arishem ends up in a weird spot where it's like, you have to tech very hard for the mirror, and when you do that, you end up in these awkward spots against the decks that are actually trying to beat you right now.
Yeah, so this is actually the Arishem deck topic, but like I feel like I want to cover a bit also about the Arishem deck play patterns
Sure.
also because like I honestly feel like you are right in the sense that like when someone snaps against an Arishem deck, they are prepared, like they're prepared to beat what they know would be in your deck. They would be prepared to beat the Blob, prepared to beat the Darkhawk, prepared to beat whatever. Maybe they have a Mobius for what they might think you're gonna play Loki. They have a Mobius for that as well, right? So they're prepared to beat your stuff, which is very interesting because I feel like the Arishem deck's true strength is the stuff you cannot prepare for. Like, because the thing is, anyone can prep to beat stuff they know is there. But what Arishem offers is Arishem offers 12 cards that you can never prepare for. So I feel like when someone snaps you against your Arishem deck, if you are choosing to stay, you are actually looking at your random generated cards and like, all right, my random generated cards don't lose to the Rogue. My random generated cards don't lose to like Mobius. Maybe I can stay because these randomly generated cards are not the stuff that they are snapping me to beat me with, They're snapping to beat what's in my deck, but I somehow randomly generated some stuff that I know their tech card cannot beat. So this is like my idea of like staying in a game when someone snaps your Arishem deck, which is kind of interesting as well, because like your every game is a bit different, right? You're like staying on different things, because if they are snapping your Arishem deck, you're just like, all right, let me look at my randomly generated cards. Can I beat the attack with these random things? If I can't, I guess they definitely beat what's originally in my deck, right? I guess I leave, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like the thing is, there are two cards people are snapping on you with. One of them has 30 power, and the other
Yeah.
one is Loki. And so it's like, you have to say, when someone is snapping you, you have to be like, okay, can I beat what I know is coming? Like,
Correct.
that's happening. Someone is dropping a Darkhawk on your head. Someone is dropping a Loki on your head. Normally, from the cards they played in the early game, you can tell which one it's going to be. You know what it's going to be. It's one of those things, though, where like those cards are so strong where against you that it's like, even though I know what it's going to be, I don't know if I can beat it. Like, they are usually correct to snap those.
Yeah. For what it's worth, funny thing is like a lot of my Arishem games that ended up being 8 cubers were actually winning with the random effects. Like I know there's one that like totally stuck out to me, which was like I randomly generated a Cosmo, and then I randomly generated an Infinite as well. So I was just like, all right, they are snapping me because they have like counters to my stuff. Let me just play my Cosmo here, pass, slam the Infinite somewhere else, and then play my Darkhawk in the Cosmo location, and then they can't do anything to it. So it's kind of funny. Like it was 8 cubes of random generation, but that's the kind of thing that Arishem lets you do.
Let's talk about the Arishem play rate, because the numbers had it
Yeah.
as over 75% in the top 10% of Infinite. I checked also in the top 50% of Infinite, it was like 73%. I checked from 70 and including all of Infinite, it was like 60%. So there was not a segment of the population where this was not more than half of the decks you play. And I wanted to have a conversation about what you do in those scenarios, because I see a lot of things where someone is like, once the Arishem mirror meta dies down, this is going to be the best Arishem deck. And whenever I see that, the only thing I can tell you is, I don't care. I don't care. I will care then. I don't care now. I care now about winning the games in front of me. You're in the meta you have, not the meta you think you're forecasting. We're going to have to like bleep that. Bleep that for me, please, Mr. Editor. Like, you are in the meta game you have, not in the meta game you wish you had. This is the situation that's in front of you. 60% minimum is what we're talking about here. Now, granted, I played a lot of Arishem counter decks today, and I don't think I saw 60% Arishem. Maybe that's bad luck. Maybe it's the fact that like people are trying to counter it. People are at the high ends of Infinite are trying to counter it. They're more interested in countering it than playing it. I don't know. But if you're looking at those numbers and you go on Untapped and you see that and you're like, huh, yeah, so at my segment of the metagame, it says 60%. Okay, you need to build to beat it. I'm sorry, you just do.
Yeah, actually, I actually have nothing much to add for this topic, because everything you said is just 100% true. Like, I've been someone that even though I'm like a bit less like hardcore in this game right now, but when I was, every time I built a deck, it was always like, all right, so this is the meta. How do we beat it? Like, if you intend to win in this game, right? If you actually intend to win in this game, you cannot ignore the fact that like if something is such a meta defining force that has like what 70% play rate, 70% whatever, like you will see it. You must try to beat it. If you're not trying to beat it and you're losing to it, you kind of should lose to it, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not trying to beat it, right?
Yep.
Like that's the point. Like even Evo when it was like that high of a play rate, but not as high as this card,
Never. We've never had any card this
right?
high. Ever.
But people are actually trying to beat Evo. They're trying to build to beat Evo, right? So like now this card is like 70 something play rate,
Yeah.
70 something percent play rate. You always have to build to beat it, which is literally our next topic right now.
And what that means, like, to be clear, is you can play Darkhawk in anything if 75% of people are playing Arishem and have it be
Yep.
correct. People will
Like, you don't
make
even have to
fun
play
of
rocks,
you.
right? You
Yeah,
don't even have to play
you don't
rocks.
have to do it, right? Like, people will be like, you are being ridiculous. What is this? But it's like, imagine those people. Imagine a metagame that was 75% Loki and those people telling you not to play Mobius. Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So let's talk about beating it. Option number 1, Darkhawk Mystique. Option number 2, Loki. Which of those do you want to start with?
Let's go Loki first, because I think the Darkhawk one is a little bit more obvious, right? It's just
Okay.
pure points and a lot of stats. But Yeah, beating it with Loki has a very similar vibe to beating Thanos with Loki in the
Yeah.
past, because the natural Arishem decks right now are stacked with like just good things, right? There's like, okay, I'm gonna say stuff like, okay, so like what is there in the deck? There is Blob, obviously it's good. You can Loki, their Loki might be excessive, but it's also pretty good. You Loki a Coulson, which is well obviously pretty good. You Loki, I
Any
mean,
of their top end.
yeah,
Like, you get
anything,
their
right?
Darkhawk, they lose. Like, it's so bad.
Even
It's
even
so
5 cost Magneto
bad.
is actually pretty insane. Like a lot of them
Yes.
play Magneto
It's
as well.
so bad. It's awful. Like, I sort of think about it two ways. The first is the card Loki is actually just a straight up snap condition into that. Like, maybe even
Yeah.
better than Darkhawk Mystique. Like it'll give you Darkhawk Mystique a decent amount of the time. Like, you just get everything you've ever wanted. The second thing, though, like when we talk about Darkhawk Mystique, if you can protect that from interaction, Invisible Woman Mystique, Super Giants, Sarah, whatever, they're not beating you. Like, the combination of cards they need to beat you is like two blobs. They need two blobs to approach that level of power. Otherwise, it's just not happening. And so, in a metagame, again, we're talking about a very inbred metagame with like one deck that has a very exploitable weakness. Literally, just Sarah, Darkhawk, Mystique, and you can just force them out of the game. There are
Yeah.
very few things that are going to beat you when you do that. It's not impossible. You can lose. Blob Zola, for example, like that'll clear their deck out. It'll do it. But man, it's really, really overpowering if you have a way to protect that stuff from interaction. There's just not a lot you can do about it.
Yeah, I want to offer a devil's advocate
Hmm.
like opinion on this whole thing. So this is the beating it topic, right? But there's also something to look at, which is the not beating it portion of the deck, which is what I've been mentioning for the last few topics as well. As like the power of the Arishem deck also lies in the fact that you cannot beat what you don't know. Like everything we've been talking about is beating what we know, right? But there are some games with Arishem whereby you I feel like you have to stay sometimes and just lose the 8 cubes, because like they are likely staying, and like maybe they top decking a card that's randomly generated that completely obliterates your game plan, right? Like they might have randomly generated an enchantress for your entire like Dark Hawk game plan. You would
Yep.
never know this. And the funny thing is whether is it correct to stay into a randomly generated enchantress? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it's very hard to say this, right? Especially with a card like Arishem, because half the time literally half the deck is random. So if you're building to beat like one of like Arishem's game plan, which is what you know is in the deck, you probably might sometimes lose to the stuff you cannot prepare for. So it's very interesting. I feel like this card offers like, it's very weird, right? Because like sometimes a lot of the times when you retreat and snap, you kind of know what you're
Yeah.
retreating and snapping into. But Arishem has literally 12 cards that you cannot prepare for. So when you actually lose 8 cubes to a randomly generated thing from Arishem, are you actually wrong for staying, or are you actually right for staying? You know, it's
I think the
that's a very
question
difficult
I think the
thing
question ends
to.
up becoming like, you ask yourself, why would they stay? Right?
Mm,
When you have this like very overpowering thing, there's only a few possibilities for why they would stay. Like, that's why we talk about the Darkhawk stuff, right? Like, yeah, it's telegraphed, it's easy to counter, but also like, okay, you played Sarah, your next turn is Darkhawk Mystique. Why would they stay? Right? What are the
or why would they
possibilities?
snap back, right?
Yes, like,
Like,
why
that's
would they
crazy.
ever be in this game? Like, you need to think about every possible outcome. Maybe they're trying to 50-50 a Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Maybe they have a
Mm,
blob that they are going to Arnim Zola. I don't know, but like, they know what you're
yes.
doing. And the fact that your power level on what you're countering with is so high, it's so unbelievably impossibly high. There aren't a lot of cards. There just aren't that are going to win them games. And as long as you do your due diligence to be like, what is it possible? What are, like, going through every card in the game, there are probably most, like 99% of them won't do anything in a spot like that. But like,
Yeah.
okay, they're snapping back Echo, Negasonic. There are very few cards, but they do exist. And
Yes.
so that is like a thing to think about, because like it's almost zero cards that can really interact with it that they aren't already running, right? So like if you're a Darkhawk deck, you run out the Darkhawk on 5, they snap back because they have priority. Well, yeah, they're roguing you, sorry. Like, that one's foreseeable. I think that the random generated cards don't have as much impact as you'd want because the power of a counter Darkhawk is so high. Like, you can randomly generate all the answers you want. There's only like 5 cards in the game that are going to be able to deal with that. Nothing else will.
It's kind of crazy, right? Like it's because it's not very likely that sometimes you just lose to it if they actually have it, you know. It's really crazy because like this card Arishem really puts a new dynamic to like um I really need to think if they have something like that based on how they play. You know, I think people, you need to actually analyze more like about how your opponent has been playing to determine if they
Yeah.
actually have the thing. It's really difficult, by the way. It's gonna be some of the hardest retreats in your life, I think. Honestly, I think so.
So let's talk about wider effects. I can think of at least one deck that Arishem made like the most unplayable thing ever. That would be Sandman, but I think Silver Surfer might be in that range as well. Like Silver Surfer was a deck that was very much coasting on being well positioned into a lot of stuff. That deck is
Mhm.
not well positioned into Arishem because it just dumps
Yep.
power everywhere and like leeches you on turn 4 or whatever. Like it can win the game. Again, like no one thinks these matchups are unwinnable, but like something like Sandman is just like, okay, I'm dead. They're me but better. Something like Surfer goes from being very well positioned in a metagame to not being very well positioned in a metagame.
The whole
And
Killmonger thing kind of just goes out the window as well, right?
yeah, I'll tell you another deck I haven't seen is Zoo. That deck is not around anymore either. And so we just end up in this weird. And for the record, I'm not sure that's correct. I think Zoo might actually still be fine, but like it's just not a
Mm.
thing people are playing a lot of. But like there are some decks that are just getting obliterated by what Arishem is doing. And so I wanted to talk about the potential knock-on effects from that. Any thoughts you
Yeah, I actually think that Zoo is actually pretty much destroyed by
had?
Arishem
Oof.
though. Like I feel like okay, the thing is Arishem is also a Mockingbird deck, but it's just like a more powerful Mockingbird deck that has like it runs like what the blob in the Arishem deck is like 20 something power on
Mm-hmm.
average, 20 power or something, and then there's the Mystique stuff, then there's the Dark Hawk, there is that we haven't even talked about the random cards that like you play earlier than usual because you have extra energy, right? Like literally just going like Colson on 2 into 4 on 3 into 5 on 4. You haven't even talked about the 6 cost stuff yet. Like you just play like that curve. Like literally one Coulson fills your curve ahead of schedule. Like it really does so much, right? Like I don't think Zoo can keep up. And not just Zoo, by the way. Like Surfer has actually always been a fair deck. It's
Yeah.
been a fair deck that was able to run good cards into the meta.
Yep.
Now it's just a fair deck that has no good cards into the meta, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't kill Monger practically anything in a RSM deck. There's nothing to kill Monger. I guess you can Mobius something, but like that's not gonna do much, right? That's actually not gonna do much. And Surfer's power is so finite, it's so fixed. Like you know that
Mhm.
3 brutes in one location plus a Surfer, you get +6 on the brutes, right? Simple. Then you just play a blob and it's like 20, and then that's it. So like, you know.
We went from a metagame where dominant tech cards were Mobius and Killmonger to a metagame where dominant tech cards are Shang-Chi and Enchantress again, and
I can
Rogue
even
to
say
some
Loki is a
degree.
tech card. It's kind of weird, but Loki is an actual like
Or
winning tech
Darkhawk,
card.
right? Like Darkhawk's a tech card. Yeah, maybe we just put
Yeah.
Darkhawk in Silver Surfer. Maybe that's fine. You know, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe that
You
works.
can play Rock Slide.
Yeah, maybe it's fine. I don't know. We'll try it. Let's talk a little bit about the Darkhawk dance because I do think that we're slowly approaching a everyone is on the same page about this kind of thing where playing a Darkhawk on 5 in those matchups is actually kind of bad because, you know, they probably have Shang-Chi, they probably have Enchantress, they probably have Rogue. If they're running all 3 in their deck, they are actually more likely to have one of those 3 cards than you are to have the Darkhawk, I think. Wait, no, that math doesn't work. But they're pretty likely to have no, they are, right? If they have 3 out of 24, that is more than 1 out of 12. Yeah, they are
Yes.
more likely to have one of those cards than you are to have the Darkhawk. So you do have to expect it if they're running all 3. And I think again, like this is one of those situations where like you ask yourself, why are they staying here? There are literally like 5 cards in the entire game that deal with it. They run 3 of them naturally, right? Like you have to ask yourself, why are they staying here? But by the same context, or not context, by the same logic, the way to beat their interaction is to just make it not work, right? So one thing that I've seen is Super Giant into the last card, or the first card played under Super Giant being Mystique, and then the last card you play on turn 6 is Darkhawk. They can't interact with that. There's just they don't run stuff to interact with. They would have to randomly generate an Echo or a Negasonic. You can't do it. Like it's just not realistic. And so you end up in these spots where what I think we're eventually moving towards is decks that can just fully autonomously Darkhawk Mystique, whether that be through Sarah or Supergiant, whatever. Decks that can just do that are going to end up in a very good spot, is sort of where my head would be at. And other decks, I do think Arishem is going to be more able to deal with. I think we're going to get towards that spot. We're not at that spot now. We're still at everyone just play Darkhawk because he's really big in that matchup. But I think that's where we end up.
Yeah, I do think the meta will actually okay. I don't know how long it will take though, because I think everyone's actually enjoying this Arishem card so much. But I do think eventually, maybe in a month.
Yeah.
I think actually that long, by the way, because this card actually is bringing a lot of joy to a lot of people right now. I feel like eventually the meta is gonna move towards Arishem is actually beatable if you do so and so things, and then there's actually an optimized deck that just farms Arishem. I'm pretty sure there will be.
I
And
think
then
we're
people
already
gravitate.
there, for the record.
I don't think so actually. I actually think Arishem decks actually still have more room to explore, like to
Okay.
grow. Like I think what we have right now is just like abusing the fact that it fits a blob in there. It can fit like Darkhawk for the mirror. It can fit its own Loki. I think there is more to go with Arishem. But obviously I haven't figured it out yet. But I do
Okay.
think there is more to go. But yeah, I just want to say something funny about the Darkhawk dance, which is now because of the insane play rate of Arishem, right? Every time I draw my Darkhawk, I'm just like, oh my gosh, yes, insta win the game. Then I actually click on my opponent's portrait and like, wait, he's playing a normal deck. Like
Yes.
sometimes it's so rare, right? Like you automatically assume that it's like Darkhawk win the location. But then you have to click their portrait and then you realize once in a while they're actually not a deck that just automatically dies to a Darkhawk stats.
Yeah. I've got something I want to yell about, and that is I am so frustrated that so much of the conversation about Arishem, it revolves around one question, which is, how would you even nerf him? Oh, how would you even nerf him? Okay, here are 3 pitches for nerfing Arishem. 1, increase the amount of cards he puts in the deck. 2, make him a smaller card and therefore a more dead draw. 3, make it so he starts in your hand like Thanos. Okay, we did it. That's how you'd nerf him. It's actually very easy. The reason this comes up so much is because Marvel Snap, I feel like something about the frequent rate of balance patches puts people in this mindset where, like, as soon as anything cool happens, they're like, actually, that's an issue. And I think people talk like, oh my god, it's a 75% play rate. Yeah, it's cool and pretty good. It's not unbeatable. It's cool and good. And so, like, we end up in this situation where people are comparing it to Loki, and it's just like, that's ridiculous. It's nowhere near as good as what that card was when it first came out. It doesn't have nearly the same impact on the metagame. When you were trying to beat Loki, you're basically like forced to play Cerebro 3 or Hela, which is absurd. When you're trying to beat Arishem, you're forced to include 1 or maybe 2 tech cards. Wow, great job. And then you start bullying that deck, right? And so we're in a situation where the card has been out for 2 days. One of them has been a hot location. I guess 2 days of real Marvel Snap, today and 2 days ago, right? And I am just sick of that being the dominant discourse. There are plenty of ways they can nerf this card. Why don't we just, like, enjoy it when we have, like, a fun new card that comes out without talking about how it has to be nerfed every single time?
Yeah, I really just want to say that like this whole nerf bagging thing is actually very real for Arishem specifically. Because like, okay, so firstly, everyone is playing it, correct? So you are seeing it every single time. And because you see it every single time, you think that like when you lose to it, it's overpowered, correct? And one more thing that I think KM hit the nail on the head is that it's because Marvel Snap. Okay, the nerf bagging in Marvel Snap in general is like way more than any any other card game I've ever played in my life. It's because it's not really like I wouldn't say it's like the player's fault. It's more like they've been like conditioned
Yeah.
to see nerfs every 1 or 2 weeks, right? Like so every time something a little bit over the top. Honestly, Arishem is not even really over the top. Like a little bit different and powerful just appears. People tend to be like, all right, I have the option for SD to nerf it. But the thing is like it's just because we are very used to very frequent changes that they think that like anything new and powerful equals nerf. But honestly, if you look at it like in a nutshell, right, there's no way this card was as good as when Loki first launched, right? There's no way this card was as good as pre-nerf Zabu. There's no way this card was as good as actually there's no way this card is as good as pre-nerf Elsa as well. There's like no way this card is as good as a lot of things.
Yeah.
But like because we are so used to seeing things change when we whine. We think that whining will change something, but I think SD actually is a bit smarter than that. Like they know that Arishem very likely doesn't need a nerf anytime soon.
I mean, maybe it'll end up needing a nerf. You don't know that from 2 days, though. Like,
yeah,
it's ridiculous.
No, but funny thing, what you said, which I actually really like, okay, I like, but I don't think they should do it, right?
Mm.
But to actually really straight up just nerf this card, you just make it a Thanos.
Yeah,
Make it the
sure.
make it like stick in the hand, right? Plus 24
Easy.
cards. Like
Like it's
it's
so easy.
actually very painful to the deck already, and I think might
Yes.
actually. But you don't really want to kill this deck, right? There's no way this is as powerful as a lot of the other things were on release. I feel like, honestly.
Yeah, I think that Arishem will end up slotting into, like, I guess the question is like how it evolves from here. If it stays looking like how
Yeah.
it looks right now, I gotta imagine it ends up as like a deck that is existing but in response to other things, right? Like if you are running the stuff that beats it, you're just gonna free roll it. If you're not running the stuff that beats it, you're gonna lose, right? It ends up being a pretty polarized thing. I think that would be a good argument to have. However, if it actually keeps evolving, if it turns out there's like ways to just make it good enough, make it work. And I think that's the kind of thing that, like, with a card that has this much inherent randomness in it, it's going to take a long time. It's going to
Yes.
take a long time to figure out. I think it's entirely possible this card ends up being overpowered. But I don't think
Mm.
there is any reasonable way to say that it should be nerfed based on 2 days of Marvel Snap gameplay,
Fair
especially
point.
for a card with this much inherent randomness in it.
Yeah. No, I do want to add one thing though. I can't remember what you exactly said, but I thought a point along the lines of like Arishem. Oh, I remember your point. Your point is that like Arishem might be a deck that is actually in response to something,
Yeah.
right? Like it responds to a certain thing in the meta. I actually think that's not very possible, by the way, because Arishem, for a deck to respond to something, it has to have like the ability to draw the cards it needs
No,
to
no, no. Other way
respond to
around.
something, right?
It's gonna be its play rate is gonna be inversely correlated with people playing like Loki and Darkhawk.
Ah, okay,
Other way
okay,
around.
okay.
Like
I
it's
get it. I
not a
get it.
deck that shows up to beat other things. It's a deck that
Yes,
shows up when
correct. Yeah, I
people
thought that's
aren't
what you said.
trying to
Yeah,
beat it. Like that's that. Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
that was my like. It shows up in response to, I should have clarified, a downtick in its hard counters.
Yeah, yeah, because the deck like Arishem kind of just like has to just be there, right? Because
Yeah,
there's no way that it like can actually counter a thing. It has to be countered because
yeah.
it's so inconsistent.
I'm hopeful for this card. Like I want it to end up being good. I think it's
Mm.
good when a card everyone is excited about ends up being good. I think I don't know. Maybe I'm a shill, but like I think that's good.
I do think it's good as well. Yeah, it's exciting and it's worth your 6,000. That's for sure.
So let's talk about random. Throughout this entire conversation, we have, especially you, been alluding to the random cards that Arishem generates. And I think on the whole, like, yes, those are a downside. Don't get me wrong. You would obviously rather have that for free. But in
Of
terms of
course.
the possible downsides that you could have put on a card like this, is this like the lightest possible downside? Like, can you think of like what
Nah.
like I kind of feel like this is like a very reasonable downside for the upside you're getting.
Yeah, dude, this is so reasonable, man. Like we even talked about it casually in like the previous topic or so. Like if this had the Quicksilver treatment, like
Yeah,
this was like way more of a downside, right? But like this current downside of like 12 random cards in your deck. I mean, like people can argue, oh, why is it not like 18 random cards in your deck? We can go on and on and on and on, right? But like just putting random cards in the deck for like +1 energy in this game isn't actually that bad of a downside, huh? Like, okay, because I'm also guilty of this. Like my first look, and I've been saying this on like multiple like videos as well. I saw like, okay, 24 card deck, inconsistent, +1 energy probably not good enough. But I was a bit wrong because +1 energy actually matters like a lot, right? This game only has like 6 turns, and every single extra energy allows you to play a bigger thing earlier than scheduled. So like, regardless of what your bigger thing is, a lot of the time like a more expensive card will tend to be a more powerful card, right? And if you're playing it ahead of schedule, it kind of matters a bit less what exactly it is, as long as it's like more expensive equals most likely bigger, you know. So like, yeah, I think Arishem has that going for it right now. But yeah, no, I really think that they're actually really very lenient with like the downside of Arishem right now. Like it's not even okay, it is definitely a downside. Don't get me wrong, but like it's not that bad, right? It's not that bad. They could be doing way worse things with these cards, and they might, which gives them room to nerf it for the nerf baggers in the future.
yeah.
They actually have room to nerf this card quite a bit, actually.
Here's the thing I've been thinking about. If Darkhawk, especially, but also Loki, didn't exist, I would have no idea what to do about this card. It would be so good. Like,
Hmm.
like we're really in a situation where like I think two cards basically are holding back the storm.
Yeah,
Darkhawk,
there's like no one card win the main deck without uh Blob and without Darkhawk, right? There's
yeah.
like actually no one card win the main deck without
There's
that.
no Mobius for this archetype without Darkhawk. They're
The
just not.
Darkhawk is literally the tech.
Yeah. Like, Darkhawk is the Mobius to this card's Loki. And if it didn't
Yeah.
exist, we'd be in so much trouble. And then I think that's when you start making the Loki comparisons, right? Because
Mm,
this card released with its Mobius already out. Loki released with Mobius not released yet. And so
True.
like that's like the
True,
real
true.
gap. But I do think like just baseline power, if those two cards didn't exist, I would be extremely expecting the best deck in the game to be Arishem. Extremely.
It's crazy how, like, I mean, I was actually kind of wrong. Like, it's crazy how the 12 random cards in the deck didn't stop, like, the energy cheat from being so good, right?
Yeah.
Like, I really didn't realize, like, how good this energy cheat will be. But you know, when I started realizing this, like, I didn't realize it before I played the card, but when I played the card, I realized it almost instantly. It's like something that I've been echoing throughout the entire video as well. The moment I played Coulson on turn 2, the
Yep.
moment I played my first Coulson on turn 2, I was like, holy crap, this is crazy strong.
Yep.
It's
The
just like,
second
it's
that
just
happens,
really
you're just
about,
like,
yeah, it's just like really about playing big things ahead of schedule. Like every single turn, it's not just. I think I get it right now. It's not like you have like a time stone or a Psylocke or like an Electro. You literally every single turn
turn.
you can play something ahead of schedule. It's kind of mad, right? If you think about it.
Yeah.
Every single turn without fail.
And Marvel Snap, contrary to a lot of hot takes, is actually a very well balanced game. Like, the average card is not going to be that much worse than a card you're actually running, right? It's going to be worse. But, like, for example, let's say you play Rescue and then in your real deck you play Cull Obsidian, right? Rescue's worse, but when you get it ahead of schedule, it's much better, right? And so you
Exactly.
end up like that, like the fact that so many random cards in Marvel Snap are just like, they're not good, but if you get them ahead of schedule, they're quite good. And
Well, like,
so,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, continue.
No, I just wanted to say like KM and I like this whole like 3 cost card with 5 power thing, right? Like if you play
Yes.
any 3/5 on turn 2, like
Yes.
come on, guys.
Yeah, and so it's like your turn 4, you're playing a 5-drop. It's probably bigger than their 4-drop because it's a
Yeah.
5-drop, right? And so you end up it's like it kind of doesn't matter what the cards are. It's just gonna be fine. All right, y'all. That was the Arishem 8 topics of Arishem on 8 cubes. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. He has been Lambie Series, and we will see you in the next one. Lambie, take us out of here.
Yeah, I just want to say that like I had a stream title that was like, is it an Arishambles or Arishampion? I think in the
Ooh.
current state of the game, it's currently like an Arishampion. That's what I think it is right now. But yeah, we'll be seeing you guys in the next video on KM's channel. So do like, comment, and subscribe. And see you in the next one.
Did you almost say KM's champion there? Did you get a little bit?
Yeah, I actually did almost say KM's champion because I said Arishampion.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right, let's just go with that. Let's just go with that. Okay, we are keeping
see
all
you
this
on
in.
KM's champion.
We're keeping all this in.
We're keeping this
See you
in.
guys.